5 years later.
"You did this to me!" Julia screamed.
Her voice echoed off the pale hospital walls as she gripped both sides of the bed she had been lying in for the past 2 hours. Her knuckles were white, her hair damp against her forehead, and her blare, if weaponized, could have leveled the entire maternity ward. Brian stood at the foot of the bed, just outside what he had privately labeled the launch radius. "Baby, it's going to be all over soon, I promise," he said calmly. He had prepared for this. Before Julia had even been wheeled into the room, he had quietly removed every object within arm's reach that could be thrown: water cups, remote controls, decorative pillows. This was not his first rodeo. "I swear I'm going to sue you, this doctor, this hospital, and any man walking the earth for bodily harm and reckless endangerment," she shouted. "Moving forward, any man who even thinks about delivering his seed into the womb of another woman will face my wrath, I promise." The doctor paused briefly, eyebrows raised. "Wait, is she serious?" he asked, momentarily distracted from the task at hand. Brian shook his head. "No, don't worry about it. She said the same thing 3 years ago when our son was born. Don't worry." The contractions subsided, and Julia inhaled sharply, recalibrating for the next wave. Slowly, the epidurals began to take effect. Julia's expression softened marginally. "Doc," she said, her voice now only moderately combative, "if these meds continue to have the desired effect, I may drop my claim against you personally. Just you, though." The doctor chuckled briefly. "I'll take that as progress," he replied. "Okay, Julia," he said, moments later, refocusing. "Time to push." She did. Again. She pushed again. The rhythm began. Push, breathe, recalibrate. Push, breathe, recalibrate. Brian moved closer now, out of the danger zone, holding her hand, whispering encouragement between clenched teeth as if willing his steadiness into her strength. 15 minutes of back-and-forth wrangling followed. The room was a choreography of instruction and effort. Then, a small but unmistakable shift. "I can see the head," the doctor announced. A lightness entered the room. "Just a little more, Julia. You're almost done." She gathered whatever remained of her resolve and pushed once more. Within a minute, the assisting nurse cleared the baby's nose and mouth. A sharp, decisive cry pierced the air. It was the most beautiful sound Brian had ever heard. "Congratulations to you both," the nurse said warmly, "on the birth of a healthy baby girl." Julia exhaled completely, as if releasing not just pain, but the accumulated weight of the past 9 months. Julia fell asleep shortly afterward. The exhaustion overtook her swiftly, completely. Within minutes, she was breathing deeply, her face finally peaceful. Brian, however, could not. He had been awake for nearly 24 hours straight, yet sleep felt impossible. He stood at the nursery window, forehead pressed gently against the glass, staring at his newborn daughter in constant vigil. Tiny fingers curled reflexively, eyes closed, chest rising and falling in delicate rhythm. 3 years earlier, when their son had been born, now he felt awe and something else. Responsibility had doubled. Love had multiplied. The following morning, after monitoring Julia's vitals and ensuring stability, the doctor gave the all-clear for discharge. Brian handled the paperwork efficiently, loaded the car seat carefully, and opened the passenger door for Julia, as he always did. On the drive home, he glanced at her. "Anything in particular you'd like to eat tonight?" he asked politely. "I'm still suing you, Brian," she replied dryly. "Stop trying to butter me up." He smirked. "You could take whatever you want," he said. "It's all in my wife's name anyway." Julia smiled faintly and turned her gaze toward the coastline passing by outside the window. "Sushi?" Brian asked carefully. She shook her head. "The sushi sucks around here, Brian. We both knew within a month of coming here that was going to be a small sacrifice I was going to have to make." He nodded. "Was it worth it?" She turned to him fully now. "You know it has, Dum-Dum." The nickname carried warmth. "Let's stop at the deli and pick up some fresh bread and cold cuts," she added. "It'll be nice to have some deli meat again. It's been a while." Pregnancy restrictions had limited her indulgences. Now, liberation tasted like prosciutto. Brian pulled into the familiar deli parking lot. "Stay in the car with the kids," he said. "I'll be in and out." Inside, the bell chimed softly as he approached the counter. "May I please have £1 each of prosciutto, mortadella, capicollo, and roast beef," he said. The deli clerk raised an eyebrow. "Looks like someone's having a party." Brian smiled. "No, those are all for my wife, except for the roast beef. That's for me." The clerk laughed. As the slicer hummed to life, Brian stepped away to survey the cheese section. It didn't matter where they moved, he thought privately. Julia's expensive tastes would never change, nor would his simpler ones. Working efficiently while the meats were being prepared, he scanned the refrigerated case. He needed 2 cheeses, £1 mozzarella, £1 provolone. But not just any mozzarella and provolone. They had to be the right brand. He had learned this the hard way. If he returned home with an inferior substitute, Julia would complain, possibly theatrically, perhaps even by throwing a shoe. He never understood how she could be so accurate with those things. He scanned the shelves once. Nothing. Twice. Then, there they are, he said aloud triumphantly. Freshly sliced mozzarella and provolone, packaged neatly in £1 portions. The label read, Francesca's. 1 day later. They woke the next morning in the same position they had fallen asleep in, Julia's head resting on Brian's chest, his right arm draped across her body, pulling her gently into him. There was something unspoken in the symmetry of it. Neither had shifted in the night. Neither had drifted far. It was as if their bodies, even in sleep, had decided that proximity was non-negotiable. When Brian stayed over at Julia's place, their routine was almost ritualistic, predictable, comfortable. An unconscious choreography that reflected something deeper than habit. They would shower together, typically no more than 20 minutes. Efficient, playful, occasionally competitive over water temperature. But there were mornings when Brian's physical enthusiasm in Julia's presence extended the timetable indefinitely. He would, of course, blame her. "I don't have this problem when you're not around," he would say. On those mornings, anything scheduled throughout the course of Julia's day needed to be restructured. Fortunately for Julia, and unfortunately for Brian, this was not one of those mornings. They stepped into the shower quietly, steam rising around them. There was less teasing than usual, more thoughtful silence. Brian washed her hair. Julia traced circles along his shoulder absent-mindedly. It felt intimate in a way that surpassed flirtation. It felt like partnership. Afterward, they dressed simply, shorts and t-shirts, the unofficial uniform of early domesticity, and made their way to the kitchen. Brian began breakfast without instruction, 3 egg omelettes, applewood bacon. He moved with an ease that came from repetition. Julia started the coffee machine and opened her laptop, scanning emails, occasionally narrowing her eyes at a subject line before closing the tab again. For once, the urgency of litigation did not command her full attention. They sat across from one another, plates warm between them, the smell of bacon filling the space. Halfway through her omelette, Julia set her fork down. "I've been thinking about our conversation last night, Brian." He didn't look up immediately. He finished chewing, wiped his mouth deliberately, then met her gaze. "And what thoughts have popped in that head of yours as a result?" he replied. Julia smiled faintly. He always had a way of disarming her with tone alone. "I've been contemplating the logistics of it all," she said. "Logistics?" Brian asked, genuinely curious. "Yes. How would we go about this?" He paused, picked up a full strip of bacon, scoffed it down as if preparing for a debate. "Look, Julia," he began, leaning back slightly. "I'm fully prepared to have you quote H.K. Williams at me. Failing to plan is planning to fail. You may even allow yourself to believe you'll never practice law again, a fallacy that'll only be true if you choose it to be." Julia's eyes narrowed, but she didn't interrupt. You'll come up with every excuse in the book to prolong, delay, or omit this path as a lifestyle option for both of us, he continued. You'll treat it like a lawsuit that you're trying to win, instead of simply playing the game as you're supposed to. And if you're successful in that endeavor, I'm okay with that. I've already won. I have you. The words were delivered without manipulation, no pressure, just fact. Julia felt the weight of it. And I have you, Brian, she replied quietly. I'm just a bit unsure about this next move. I understand, Julia. Trust me, I do, he said. Let's not forget I'm part of this equation too. I may not have to spend as much time as you contemplating career consequences, but if I'm going to be a good husband, a good father, it'll take a lifelong commitment and investment of everything I am. The kitchen grew still. Julia looked down at her half-eaten omelette, now cooling on the plate. She was accustomed to controlling outcomes, forecasting variables, anticipating risk. Courtrooms rewarded preparation. Life, she was learning, did not always operate under those same parameters. Ryan leaned forward again. Every day, all around the world, people with no plan whatsoever fall in love, get married, and have children, he said. The logistics, the resources, none of that matters as much as we think it does. I'm not saying be careless, but people shouldn't let logistics become an impediment to living their lives. The smart ones don't. Julia lifted her gaze. I have about $400,000 saved in the bank, she said slowly. Another $200,000 tucked away in a 401k. Well, there you go, Brian replied immediately. I could probably clear 2,000 to 3,000 selling the Tacoma, he added. We can throw that in with the rest. Then again, I always had a feeling you were only dating me for my money anyway, so this comes as no surprise. Julia tried to maintain composure. She failed. Laughter erupted out of her, full, unrestrained, almost violent. She bent forward, one hand on the table, the other covering her mouth as if attempting to contain it. It lasted nearly a full minute, the kind of laughter that leaves you breathless. Brian watched her, amused but slightly confused. I didn't think it was that funny, he said cautiously. She straightened slowly, and that's when he saw it. Tears. Not from laughter alone. Something deeper. He leaned forward instinctively. Are you okay, Julia? He asked softly. She looked up at him, eyes glassy but steady. I love you, Brian, she said. The shift in tone was immediate, grounded, certain. I love you more than I can put into words. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to have your children. The kitchen, moments ago filled with humor, now felt sacred. I'm going to put in for 6 weeks unpaid time off tomorrow, she continued. We'll take a vacation. We'll figure out the details, together. What do you think? Brian did not hesitate. Now that, he said, smiling, more than anything, sounds like a plan. Julia said she wanted to go somewhere warm with nice beaches. Brian said he wanted to go somewhere historic, where he can learn something new. They both landed on Sicily as the top option. That first day being there on vacation with Julia, browsing a local grocery store, Brian asked a store clerk what cheese would go best with the bottle of red wine he was holding. The clerk said, with his Sicilian accent, I couldn't tell you what cheese to have with your delicious red wine from Tuscany. All Italian wines are delicious. Tuscany, Napoli, Sicily, no matter. But you must make sure that whatever cheese you purchase, that the label reads Francesca's. Brian responded back politely. Francesca's, you say? Yes, Francesca's. The company was started many years ago by a young couple. The young man's family had been in the cheese business in Palermo for generations, and as a tribute to his newlywed wife, he created a new line of cheeses under her name. Unfortunately for the two of them, divorce would soon follow. It was an arranged marriage that would ultimately end because they were never passionately in love with one another. You see, son, you must allow your heart to choose the person you're going to spend the rest of your life with. If not, you'll end up regretting it. Anyway, after the divorce, Francesca maintained ownership of the brand and personally upholds the quality and standards of the product. Francesca Altamonte, you know? With all her success, she still lives here in Alcamo to this day. Brian thanked the store clerk for his advice and selected a variety of cheeses from the refrigerated section, all of them branded Francesca's. He and Julia headed to the register to pay. Upon exiting the store, Brian asked Julia to give him 5 minutes to make a quick phone call. Julia, now curious, asked, "To whom are you calling?" Brian blurted out excitedly, "Vinny."
5 years later. After getting back to the house, both Julia and Brian agreed that prosciutto and roast beef sandwiches would have to wait a few minutes longer. Brian conjured up a grilled cheese sandwich and cut it into triangles. Julia prepped the milk. Having his 3-year-old son sit in his lap while eating the grilled cheese sandwich he just made, Brian spoke to him. "Look, Vincent, you're a big brother now. You now have a responsibility to look after your little sister. It's your job to protect her the way Daddy protects Mummy." Julia looked up at Brian. "I almost spilled some of Sarah's milk, poor thing." After putting both Vincent and Sarah to bed, they finally had a moment together. Julia prepped the cold cuts. Brian sliced the bread. "Francesca's," Julia spoke out loud. "You've done well for yourself this evening." Brian smiled. "How are they doing anyway, Vinny and Francesca?" "Did you like New York?" Julia asked. "When I spoke with him last week, Vinny had mixed feelings. He wanted to do something special for their 3rd anniversary, so he booked a hotel right off Park Avenue. He took her to the Museum of Natural History, the Met, top of the Empire State Building, Statue of Liberty, etc. He did the full tourist thing. Francesca seemed happy throughout the trip, he said, and she showed nothing but gratitude. But looking deeper, he could tell something was off. Rather, he could feel it. His words, not mine, Brian said. "What was it?" Julia asked. "What felt off to him?" Francesca was out of place. Everything that encompasses a big city, the buildings, the lights, the restaurants, the glamour, the traffic, the endless amounts of people. All of it seemed to overwhelm Francesca, he said, and she never truly felt comfortable. He believes that the happiest part of their trip was the return flight home. Brian paused for a moment, then continued. The evening they got back, he accompanied her to their dairy farm. While sitting on a bench looking out at the pasture, Francesca leaned into him and said, "Mi mancano le mie vacche," Brian attempted to say in his broken Sicilian. Julia, now having finished a delicious bite of the hand-carved prosciutto sitting on her kitchen counter, questioned immediately, "What does that mean?" Brian looked up at her, English translation, "I miss my cows." They both laughed simultaneously for a good minute. Well, they're home now, and they finally have each other. That's all that really matters in this life, no? Julia said, putting it in the form of a question without really seeking or needing an answer. Brian nodded in agreement. After finishing dinner, the two of them went out on their front porch for a nightcap. Julia with a glass of wine, Brian with his pipe, an ugly habit that he picked up over the last 2 years, thanks to Vinny. Julia, however, did not approve. "When are you going to stop smoking that thing? Next time you see Vinny, tell him I'm going to sue him for environmental hazards. We're in the EU now. I have a case," Julia said. Ryan smirked. "Do you have any regrets, Julia, with all of the decisions we've made?" Julia sat with that question for a second and responded, "I'll admit, 5 years ago I was a little apprehensive. Yes, we had an amazing 3-week vacation here in Alcamo. The people, the culture, the lifestyle. Neither of us wanted to leave. Quite the opposite experience that Francesca had in New York. But when we got back home and finally made the decision to move here, open the hotel on the beach and buy that used boat with you having no sailing experience, I knew what the end result would be." Brian focused in on her. "And what result is that?" Brian asked. "Happiness," Julia said. "The hotel provides far more than what we need for a comfortable living,"
And your weekend charter excursions are now a top tourist attraction on Yelp. Any hiccups along the way, I knew you would figure them out. And in the few times you needed help or support with any of the projects that our new lifestyle demands, I am there for you. I'm living the dream, Brian. Julia paused, then asked, "What about you? How do you feel?" Brian, taking another puff from his pipe and blowing it in the opposite direction of Julia, responded, "I've always known that you and I would end up together, and as I've said, that's all that mattered. As long as I have you, I've won. It did, however, take a little longer than that for me to receive confirmation about our path," Brian said. Julia, engaged and curious as ever, asked, "Confirmation about our path? Please explain." "Don't think for a second I wasn't aware of the sacrifices you were set to make by coming here. Very few people, both men and women, would walk away from being partner at a prestigious law firm and the career you were bound to have. I was unsettled, to say the least, about you giving all that up. Then, out of the blue, less than a month from us being here, Vinny calls me and tells me he's flying out here for a month and would like to stay in one of our rooms. I jokingly said that I didn't expect him to miss me that much so soon. After laughing at me, he said Francesca Altamonte no longer wishes to live the rest of her life with regret, and I feel obligated to accommodate her in this endeavor. Within 90 days of that conversation, Little Sicily's pizzeria had been sold, a single bag packed, and a one-way ticket purchased. This time here, to Alcamo. If Vinny can give up everything he'd built over the course of his lifetime to live the last chapter of his life with the woman he's always loved without regret, then I could embrace a path that would allow me an entire lifetime in doing so." Julia stood up, leaned in, and kissed Brian. "Let's go check on Sarah. And you need to get some sleep. 7 a.m. dolphin excursion tomorrow, and 2 new guests checking in at 11. Brian put out his pipe, nodded politely, and complied with Julia's requests, just like he had always done.